Hello everybody, welcome to another album of the month review. Today we've got February, and I'm going across every album I've listened to within this month. Now, unlike January, there's more than 9 albums, so in terms of what I'm going to mention, I've limited a little bit of what I wanted to say just so I don't spend too long on one album, which I did with the Catatonia review on the January bit, which was like almost 4 minutes, so I don't want to continue and just constantly spend more time going across one in particular album when there's a lot of albums to talk about. But I still have left my opinion and still try and get to the main points I want to make for each album on here. So yeah, this is going to be a bit longer of a video. I've actually got some albums that I would say are in the middle, so instead of it just being worst and best like last time, there is the worst albums of the month, there's the meh, alright albums, and then there's the best that the month has to offer. So yeah, let's pretty much dive into it. I'm going to start off with the worst and eventually we'll get to the best. So starting off with the worst albums of the month, we have Pierce the Veil, The Jaws of Life. I'm not the biggest Pierce the Veil fan, so I was not expecting anything too zany or anything good, and I kind of got exactly that, just something pretty weak in my opinion. I did like the grunge direction they took with the Past of the Nirvana track, which I thought would have been interesting if they kind of explored that a bit more, because it feels a lot more refreshing, and honestly the song's not half bad actually. But pretty much most of the record just sticks to that classic post-hardcore they are known for, which I just don't really like the band's take on it too much. It's not really for me personally. I also think some of the songwriting in this album is pretty weak, like Emergency Contact, mentioning I can bring the sex appeal is by far one of the most cringiest things I've probably heard from this band, period, and that's ended up being one of the better songs of the album. I just don't really like this one, to be honest. I personally say it's contender for one of the worst albums of the year so far. I give it a 1.5 out of 5. I just did not like this one. Next we have the new one by Pigs, or known as Pigs times 7, with Land of Sleeper. It's just not an album that really stood out to me much, and it's close to being an okay album, but there's just a little bit more I just couldn't really get into with this record, which honestly is kind of a shame, because I definitely think there's a lot of potential, especially when they throw some curveballs into this one, like Mr. Medicine, The Weatherman, which definitely are some very interesting and very significant songs with just a very amount of experimentation, especially since Mr. Medicine is a very shorter, quicker paced song than a lot of the other album for this more stoner metal direction that they take it. This album has got some sluggish breakdowns in it, especially in Big Rig, which is one of the best tracks this album has. I like the way that this track just builds up its speed towards the end. It's a pretty good song overall. I just think the album had good potential, but it just didn't really stand out to me personally. But yeah, I give it a 2 out of 5. It's close to being alright, but I just personally found a little bit more I didn't like, as I did like Blood Money Part 0 by Dope. Pretty much the either prequel or sequel. I assume it's the prequel to the last album, Blood Money. And honestly, this is not a very good Dope album. Not I'm huge on the band, but just lyrically this album is really, really weak. Especially the amount of times they had to repeat itself in tracks like Parasite, Fuck It Up and Believe. I also found Dead World to be kind of cringy with the I'm dancing with my dead girl sort of focus. It's just, what are they going for here? Instrumentally, it definitely is one of the better performances, I'd probably say. I definitely like the way that they blend in this industrial riffs with the classic electronic sounds that Dope likes to incorporate within, and it definitely shows on Best of Me, which actually is surprisingly, in my opinion, one of the best songs. I think the latter half of the album does pick up a little bit, but that's already too late, especially if it's only like 2 songs I start liking. The track Joke is a pretty interesting song to me, because it sounds like if Five Finger Death Punch went industrial and wrote a song about cancel culture. I'm not going to read the lyrics, but if you read the lyrics yourself, you can kind of see where I get that from. It just reminds me of the track Fake by Five Finger Death Punch, actually. And no hate to Drama Club, but I personally think the vocals are some of the weakest I've heard as a guest appearance on a lot of bands. I find just the delivery to be kind of goofy, the way that it's kind of sung. It isn't really something I enjoy, and it just kind of feels really awkward. I guess it kind of fits with the zaniness this album is bringing, but I'm not really one for it. And the Cure cover of Love Song I personally felt was kind of butchered here. This is not a very good album. I give it a 1.5 out of 5, and I probably won't listen to really anything on this again. Next we have the final album by Godsmack, Lighting Up the Sky. This is a pretty much an average Godsmack album in my opinion. It dives into kind of what you'd expect the band to pull off, and that's not very good, especially when you're pretty much finishing your legacy when it comes to songwriting. This is literally the last album that Godsmack's going to write, and I just personally don't think it really does much to differentiate and really kick off to a phenomenal ending. It just kind of feels pretty in my opinion. I've never been a fan of this band anyway, just since the blatant steal of Alice in Chains' sound they have. But it does sound like they explore a little bit out of that and try some other ideas, especially in songs like What About Me and Lighting Up the Sky, which are definitely two of the stronger songs this album has to offer. I personally think Truth's quite a decent song as well. It's nothing crazy, but the kind of direction this song takes is a pretty nice. It has a pretty nice feel to me, in my opinion. Something I definitely like. But yeah, it's not a powerful, phenomenal ending to their discography. I can just say that blatantly. It just isn't a very good album, and it just doesn't really have much for me to go back into. It's a very mixed album, in my opinion. It was originally an album I considered good, but I think when I went back into it, I just couldn't really get into it. It just kind of felt very samey when it wasn't trying to be different. It just wasn't a very strong album. I don't think Godsmack necessarily had that confidence to kind of excel with some great ideas here. It just felt very bland. I'm going to give this Godsmack album a 2 out of 5. To wrap off the worst albums, I have the new one by 100 Reasons, Glorious Sunset. So this is the band's first album in 15 years, and they do bring that energy from their earlier stuff to now, and sprinkling in some fresh ideas within the mix, and I definitely do like some of the stuff that this album does contain. Glorious Sunset, New Glass Isn't Done showcase the album's strengths with some catchy hooks and some interesting chords which ignite that similar energy from pretty much to their debut album, Ideas Above Our Station. As a whole record, I just don't really think it's as strong as it could be. I think some songs do feel quite bland and struggle to captivate me in throughout, unlike the 3 I mentioned before, and it's kind of more of an album I will listen to the select songs above and go about my day. I don't think this is the band's best attempt at a comeback. I did see a lot of people did like this album, but just to me it wasn't really anything too interesting, but I still appreciate it. I think it's got enough for me to say it's not a terrible album, but as a whole, it is one of the weaker albums I have reviewed. I'm going to give it a 2, but it is pretty close to getting a 2.5. So that wraps up the worst albums. Now we're moving on to the alright albums of the month. Pretty much the one split in the middle. I'd say everything here is like a 2.5 out of 5, because that just kind of to me feels quite split. Maybe a 3. It just depends how good it is, but yeah, most of this pretty much I give it the same ranking if it's on this tier. So to start off, we have the new one by Lansdowne. I do think that's how you pronounce the name. I've never said it out loud, but yeah, Medicine. Which, to me, the production throughout this whole record is pretty good. I have nothing really to say, but it just kind of definitely drives some of the songs nicely. It has a good sound, especially instrumentally, with songs like Medicine and Halo, some of the best songs on this album that just kind of pull you in, definitely show you what the album's capable of doing. But as a whole, it's nothing crazy. It's just kind of a average hard rock album, which pretty much pays homage to the hard rock sound in the noughties, with a bit of a modern twinge to it. We have the new one by Paramore, This Is Why, which changes from that good old pop-punky direction that they've been following for quite some time to a more indie-driven concept of an album, which, in my opinion, doesn't sound too bad. I do think the later half kind of is the weakest point, especially when you have the stronger half with songs like This Is Why, The News, and Running Out of Time, which definitely have that upbeat energy that works really well with this indie direction they're going for. Some really nice vocal performances from, I think, Hayley Williams, and I think as a whole this album, it could be better, but I still think it's a pretty interesting listen, especially since I'm not crazy into Paramore, so I guess it kind of is alright, I guess. It's a pretty interesting album, but it's nothing more than that. We got the new one by Solence, a band I've been following before they released their first album. This Swedish electronic core band has just been pretty much at one point releasing an album a year. We had Brothers 2019, Direction 2020, Deafening 2021, but then we had a gap 2022 to then release this album in 2023, which unfortunately this is the only time I would not say the album is great. I think each time they've outdone themselves, especially with Deafening being their strongest album in my opinion, just having so many different ideas just to play with, but here they just stick to too much of one sound, and it just feels like there's not enough of that classic Solence sound to go around. I don't think they can kind of stick to one style and make it work consistently, because some of the songs just feel similar to others like Antidote and Better This Way, which the songwriting I guess tries to differentiate from each other, but they just come off way too similar. And at least they did kind of stick to something that does feel in line with their brand, but I think ever since they joined Hopeless Records it's kind of been hopeless for them. But it's not a bad album, honestly. I think there's not really a song I think is weak. I just think a lot of the songs kind of mesh together, and the songs that aren't are some of the strongest stuff on the album. It's only just because they have a few gimmicks to make them stand out a bit more. It's a pretty average album. It's honestly the worst thing they've done, but it's not a bad album either. We have a new one by a sort of newish Welsh band, Those Damn Crows, with Inhale and Exhale. I was not planning on reviewing this, but I did see they got number 3 in the UK charts, and I thought, well, I guess I'll give it a listen, and it wasn't too bad actually. It's a band that likes to go for a more arena rock, anthem-filled tracks, which I think they definitely get better as you dive further into the album, with the later half being the stronger half with some pretty good bangers on it, especially tracks like Find a Way and Waiting for Me, which has some of their best efforts in my opinion. I like the take of hard rock they go for, but it's not really anything unique, and it's not really an album you haven't really heard an idea like. It kind of reminds me a bit of bands like Creed a little bit, but with a kind of I guess a better take, if honestly. I do kind of find this a little bit refreshing, if it's going for something similar to that, even if it's not as unique. Nothing bad, but nothing great. We got a new one by the Irish indie band Inhaler, which I think it's similar to Paramore. I like the pretty much the indie rock vibe this one goes for, which at least with Inhaler this is kind of more on their brand, whereas Paramore they pretty much experimented with it. I think it pretty much kind of gives a similar result, where I think there's some pretty good songs from this, but there's also some that just kind of feel a bit bland and just not as creative as some of the other tracks on the album. I think it's definitely a good step up from their debut album. It won't always be like this, but yeah, as I think there's a bit of filler throughout the tracks, especially with The Things I Do. I just personally don't think this song really needs to exist, but that's just kind of my little opinion on that. I think the first few tracks lifts the album into a great direction, but it kind of fluctuates. It isn't until Dublin and Ecstasy where I think we kind of have some of the best albums kind of kept for last, like When I Have Her on My Mind and Now You Got Me. Pretty much the 3 strongest tracks on this album. I think there's a bit more for me to get from this album than Paramore's This Is Why, but I still think they get a very similar ranking of, that classic 2.5, which I put for the alright. So yeah, not a bad album, honestly. Oh, we got a new one by Steel Panther. I have no clue why I even decided to review this one, but there you go. I personally would say Friends with Benefits slaps, wouldn't you agree? It's a pretty banging song. It's just another Steel Panther album. It's nothing bad, it's nothing grey, it's just alright. I just don't really want to talk about it much because it's just so stupid. We have a new one by The Church, and this one's called the Hypnogogue. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's a concept album that attempts to touch new ideas for the band's 26th album. I'm not even joking, this is more than Uriah Heep had, and I talked about them on the January review. Like 26. Anyway, yeah, that is a lot of albums. There's more of a progressive direction I think they're exploring here, which meshes in the band's classic new psychedelic wave sound they're going for, giving them a new fresh take with some classic ideas in the making, like C'est la vie, which this one definitely stood out to me straight away. It's a pretty good song. Gonna be honest though, like with Uriah Heep, it's not an album I personally think is, incredible. I did say Uriah Heep is a good album, but I put this one as alright. But I just don't think the band can really do anything as good as they could in the earlier period in their best years. I still think it's good that The Church is going, because I do like what this album has to offer. I just don't think it's a crazy good album, honestly. But I think it still has some charm here and there. It's an alright album. This is why it fits here. And that wraps all the alright albums of the month. Now we're moving on to the best, which definitely I'm happy to say there's more good albums than there is alright or worse. So it's quite nice to see that continuing on. I hope that's a trend it does stay, because I personally found January was quite evenly split when you had 4 weak albums and 5 strong ones. It was almost just kind of 50-50. If there was another weak album, that would have just been 50% good, 50% bad. So it's nice to see a lot more good albums this month. Starting off, let's talk about Distant and their new album Heritage. It's another wild ride that takes new elements and packs them with a lot of punch. I've definitely enjoyed the ambience and the overall just creative direction this one's taken over their previous albums, and it definitely has some songs that just absolutely kick ass. Argent Justice makes for one of the most wild collabs this year. There's a handful of people on this track, and I'm not even going to go for it because there's just so many bloody people to make this song absolutely fantastic. The growls and scream, pretty much the screams are just as good as ever, and I think this is a more consistent album. It just kind of finds a good aesthetic to go for, and I generally love the way they can really the mixing goes, just to kind of make everything pop out nicely. Nothing incredibly good in my opinion, but I still think it's a good album. I give it a 3 out of 5. I definitely think when it comes to that deathcore sound, this is a good album and a good band. We have a new one by the Swedish melodic heavy metal band In Flames with Foregone. Oh, it's so nice to see In Flames release a brilliant album. I personally found Siren Charms and the Eye of the Mask to be some of the weakest stuff that In Flames have put out, so it's nice that Foregone just completely diverts away from going for a similar sound that those two have, and kind of goes for a bit more of a classic vibe while mixing in new elements at the same time. So it's nothing that feels right at home with just copying their earlier sound. It definitely has a unique direction it goes for, and I appreciate that. The melodic metal aspect is one of the album's strongest features. I honestly think they have a really good amount of melody, especially in the choruses as well. Like some songs, for example, like Meet Your Maker, Bleeding Out, and just have some really good choruses I really enjoy. And I like the heavier tone as well. I like they are a heavy band, but I like the way that the heaviness and the melodic works beautifully here. Honestly, some of the best riffs period, from their whole discography, comes from tracks like Meet Your Maker and Stay Slow Decay. Just some very brutal moments I really enjoy, and just honestly I love the energy these tracks had, and I'm glad they're singles as well, because they definitely are some of the best songs on the album. I have one little issue with this album, with just how good, besides how good it is, I think the main problem has got to be the lyrics. I think this is a prominent thing on a dialogue in B flat minor and Sinosaur. Literally in a dialogue in B flat minor, one of the lyrics is, "There's a ghost in my head I fight every day, and sometimes he gets his way. I'm stuck in a loop, I'm trying to feel, I hear him speak, so I know that it's real." It definitely is one of the weakest things this album has to offer when it comes to discography, and it kind of blows, because I think everything else is so bloody good. Like, I don't think a single song falls short when it comes to its vocals or instrumentals or just even production. It's just the lyrics, I think, is the weakest point. And I just have to mention In the Dark as well is one of my favourite songs on this. It's a really strong song. Honestly, one of my favourite In Flames songs, period. I think this album I give a 4 out of 5. I know I said the lyrics aren't great, but I really enjoyed this one. I had such a blast with it, and while I heard that it's not everyone's cup of tea, I think I'm just happy that Foregone is definitely a good In Flames album after a while. It's definitely deserved. We have a new one by Yumi at 6, Truth Decay. I definitely enjoy this album quite a lot. I like how they've incorporated some new takes, especially to their signature sound, back from the Cavalier Youth period, and you definitely get some new ideas like Breakdown, which screams some heavy with some electronic beats to kind of change the pacing, so not every track kind of feels too samey, and I like how a lot of the songs have a very distinctive sound to them while feeling like Yumi at 6. And while it's not them at their best, I still think it has a lot of room to breathe and playing around with some fresh ideas, and I even like the guest appearances they have as well. I think Cody Frost is a great feature on this album, but definitely the best one has got to be Rao Reynolds from Enter Shikari. He definitely makes No Future, Yeah Right, one of the best songs I've heard from You at Me at 6, and I love the way it kind of drives some more synths, and it just makes it feel more right at home for Reynolds, especially with the bridge screaming Enter Shikari. It just has that sort of sound to it, and I'm quite happy to hear that. I definitely like the kind of idea that they incorporate a little bit of that Enter Shikari sound to this track, especially with the lead singer as well. Good ideas back and forth. I think some songs fall flat, like Ultraviolence, which feels pointless when you have Breakdown on the album. It just kind of feels like a weak version of it, and I just don't really see the point of it. Whereas you have some really good songs like Deep Cuts and God Bless the 90s Kids, with just some very good guitar work that just drives some pretty interesting direction for them. It's a 3 out of 5, nothing more. Got a new one by Avatar, Dance Devil Dance. My first listen was actually quite interesting. I did not like this album, and I would have considered it one of the worst albums, but going into round 2, it did grow me quite a huge amount, especially the main track, lead single Dance Devil Dance, which just started off to a catchy classic in the making, to follow into some wild tracks like Chimp Mosh Pit, which I hated, but I do like this one quite a bit now, I will be honest. I don't know why I didn't like it before. Consider Valley of Disease to be one of the best melodic choruses this album offers, with just some very powerful chords and definitely just some of the best guitar work I've heard from Avatar in a while. The lyrics have this kind of weird, goofy charm that fit in with the weirdness this band offers. It kind of reminds me of Avatar Country when it comes to just like some silly lyrics. Like Gotta Wanna Riot is a good example, when it tells the story of two characters, Bobby and Robbie, with Bobby being a cannibal, but then it appears that Robbie is the cannibal. I think this was an error from the band. This might have been confirmed. I think it was either that, or maybe it's just that Bobby and Robbie is just two personalities of one person. I don't know if it's Twist or not, but yeah, I did enjoy this album so much. It literally went from a 2 to a 3.5, so it definitely had a huge growth on me, and I'm quite happy to see that. It's probably one of the best albums of February in my opinion. We have the debut album from Graphic Nature, A Mind Waiting to Die, and for a band with the same of a Deftones track named Graphic Nature from Koine Yokan, I did not expect them to go for this pretty much angry new metal electronic blend that they have. I honestly do enjoy it though. I think it gives off some great potential, especially when you got some electronic passages that just feel inspired by Nine Inch Nails, with just a more angry techno combination between all the songs, and just these sort of some crazy ideas. A lot of the songs are pretty short. There's literally a lot that are under 3 minutes, which I do think works great for Graphic Nature, because I feel like some of the songs, they kind of get to the main point. They just pretty much give you the best of the sound, and if it kind of continues on, it's going to wear out a little bit. So it's kind of quick and to the point, although it doesn't work on some tracks like Into the Dark, where I feel it's getting somewhere and it just kind of cuts abruptly. So it works quite a bit, but then sometimes it has its downside. But it is a good album overall, underrated for sure. I definitely check it out. I'll give Graphic Nature's new album a 3 out of 5. One of my most hyped albums of the year is Gorillaz' Cracker Island, and honestly it's a nice change of pace to have a Gorillaz record that feels more like a record and less like a collection of singles, which that's what Song Machine felt like. So it's nice to kind of have something that feels more like an actual album where the songs flow nicely into each other. And to be honest, the singles definitely are some of the highlights for this record. I think all 5 of them were fantastic. You had the nice upbeat, funky, groove-driven Cracker Island with Thundercat's bass and backing vocals, which honestly makes for one of the best Gorillaz songs in a really long time. It feels so refreshing, and I love this new change of pace. Just the funk direction and is so fantastic here. To the high energy Skinny 8, which has some rapid electronic drumming progression. And it's just a lot of good singles. I like Silent Running. I like the way that the synths build upon Damon Albarn's voice, and I even enjoy the kind of just the way it sounds. It doesn't even feel like a Gorillaz song as much, but it just captivates some new ideas that just it feels fantastic in my opinion. But then the weaker stuff has got to be the non-singles in my opinion. I just don't think they help the album stay consistently brilliant. And while I don't mind Oil featuring Stevie Nicks, I don't think that track's too bad. I personally found the other non-singles to feel weak. This is mainly Tormentor, for example, which I just felt it was more of a Bad Bunny song without that Gorillaz sound. It just kind of felt like, well, Gorillaz can do something similar to the instrumentals that you get in Bad Bunny. And yes, you hear Damon's voice, but that's for a really small section of the song, whereas this is mainly Bad Bunny. And I saw this one blowing up just because it had him on it, and I don't know, I just thought it wasn't a very strong Gorillaz song whatsoever for what they wanted to offer with this album. I personally found Tarantula, The Tide Influencer, and Possession Island also not to offer many creative or refreshing new ideas. Considering the album does kind of stick more to one sound, it does end up kind of making some songs work beautifully with that direction, while others might struggle. I think some tracks like New Gold kind of feel like they're experimenting a little bit out of it, but as a whole, Cracker Island's probably the most consistent to one sound that Gorillaz have ever been. Even Demon Days and Plastic Beach, which had a full vibe to follow, especially Plastic Beach going for a bit more of a calmer direction, had a lot more exploration in it, whereas I felt Cracker Island, it was more or less just too heavily on exploring this one in particular style, and it doesn't really develop as many creative ideas as Plastic Beach could have, honestly. But I did still enjoy this album. I also don't understand why Controller, Captain Chicken, and Crocodillas aren't on the base album, considering all these 3 songs are great. They're all brilliant choices, and I would have happily swapped Tormentor, Tarantula, and Possession Island with them, because I personally felt they're great, and it also annoys me too because Del the Funky Homo Sapien hasn't been on a Gorillaz track since Clint Eastwood and Rock the House, the debut album. So you bought Del back for Captain Chicken, but it's a deluxe only song. Why is it not on the album? This is just huge potential just lost. But yeah, I still really enjoy this one. Even with the weaker songs, I think the singles definitely help it stay a strong album. It kind of has a similar feature to Solence, which is just, like I said, strays too much to one sound. But in my opinion, I think Gorillaz explored some new, fresh ideas, and I think it just felt a little bit more unique, honestly, for them. And I'll give Cracker Island a 3 out of 5. The new one by INSOMNIUM definitely stumped me as well. It was quite similar to how I felt about Avatar. I didn't really like it, but going into it again, it's definitely a stronger album for sure. It's also a shorter album than their 2019 Heart Like a Grave, which I don't think it holds back, and it honestly feels a lot tighter of a listen from the track 1696 all the way down to the powerful ending, The Rapids, which definitely are two pretty strong songs from this record. The instrumentals pack a huge punch, and the growls are insanely beautiful over each and every riff and just drum, especially the way they sometimes kick into some very fast energy that's just absolutely fantastic. I also enjoyed the two features as well, and I think they honestly coincide across the tracks they're on beautifully. Saki's Tollis, I think that's how you pronounce it, or Saki's Tollis on White Christ is a great addition, and I think Joanna Kukela on God's Forsaken are definitely the highlights on these tracks. And they add a lot more depth to that melodic death metal sound that INSOMNIUM is bringing here. Lillian and The Witch Hunter are the strongest tracks lyrically as well as sonically. I really love Lillian's chorus, which the slightly calmer guitars really helps pop that sound out nicely. I wasn't really big on this one. I'd probably say it's not one of my favourites still, but I can see why people like it, and I think INSOMNIUM delivers a nice performance here. No filler, straight to the point, great album, 3 out of 5. And finally, to wrap up the albums of the month, we have Shame's third album, Food for Worms. I honestly think Shame brings a very versatile performance here, exploring all sorts of ways to keep their sound fresh and unique. They're pretty much known for their post-punk sort of direction, but I think this album explores a lot more into some fresh new ideas, just rather than going for that classic post-punk direction you hear a lot of bands go for. So Shame just absolutely exploring the shit out of this album is beautiful. Six Pack honestly is one of the best songs that definitely showcases that energy that they're bringing with their fast-paced drums accompanying their loud, vibrant riffs, creating tracks begging to be played live. And I definitely think this is a good start to their more lively, upbeat sounds, with tracks like Alibis and The Fall of Paul, which definitely just keeps that momentum going while fluctuating between some more melodic written songs to just the classic high energy like these ones. Adderall is one of the standout tracks on this record. It soars into a melodic ballad direction while sticking to their guns and keeping it instrumentally branded as a Shame banger, building the emotion up throughout with that high energy towards the end. It's a really powerful song and definitely one of the best songs I think Shame has put out, period. It's a really fantastic banger. And not any bad song in my opinion. I don't think there's really anything that feels weak or doesn't live up to the whole album. There's a lot of creative ideas. I love the way that everything is interpreted. I think lyrically it's just fantastic. Like Six Pack as well, one of my favourite things just has to got to be Pamela Anderson reading you a bedtime story and every scratch card is a fucking winner. Love that. I love a lot of the lyrics on this one, especially Yankees lyrics as well, some of the best stuff. A lot of the songs just have so many creative ideas, and it's nice to see that they're really evolving from what they started off with. Some fans may not like it, they might want a bit more of songs like Six Pack or just something that feels more on par with their earlier stuff, but I'm really happy to see them evolve, and I think they can do some really good shit with this new direction they want to go towards. Or better yet, maybe explore a whole new area and try something different. Either way, I'm looking forward to it, and this album is great. I'm giving it a 3.5 out of 5. And there you have it. That is all the albums of February I've listened to and reviewed. There was a lot of pretty good stuff this month. I don't think there was an album that really pulled me in as much as Skyboy to Stars, which I still would say is my strongest album of the year, from January and February at least. But I think February brings some really good stuff in, so I guess I'll just go through the top 3 and the bottom 3 of the month. So starting off with the bottom 3, just to kind of get the weakest stuff out of the way, considering I also didn't do this properly on the January video, my third worst album has probably got to be Godsmack. I just didn't really resonate with this one as much, and I think there was some good ideas that they were exploring, trying something different, but I just felt this was another Godsmack, at least an average Godsmack album, not one of their best ones, definitely one of their weakest, and I just couldn't really get into it. I honestly felt a lot of the songs just kind of bored me a little bit. It wasn't a very interesting album. Number 2, I put Dope Blood Money Part 0. I just didn't really care for this one much, and I wanted to get into it, but the more I listened, I just found it more obnoxiously annoying. I just found it to be quite irritating of a album. I think it has some potential, but yeah, Dope's just a band I think have just been declining for a while, and this definitely is no exception. It's a very weak album, in my opinion. I just can't really get into this one. And finally, number 1 is Pierce the Veil, The Jaws of Life. I literally only really cared for like 1 or 2 songs on this one. Even, I know I am a bit biased because I'm not a huge fan of Pierce the Veil, but I just didn't really think there was anything really interesting anyway. Even if I was giving it my best and going in with no high expectations, just kind of playing it straight ahead, which I tried to, I don't think it would have made a difference. This wasn't a very interesting album, and definitely one of the weakest ones, for sure. But going into the 3 best albums, let's start off with the third best, which I would say was Avatar Dance Devil Dance. It's definitely interesting how much this grew on me. It went from being a weak album to being a fantastic, fun album. It's not the best thing in the world, but I definitely enjoyed it more than others, and I think it offers a lot of great ideas, and it's just pretty much jam-packed with some pretty good bangers on it. I think from start to finish, it's a fun little wild ride for sure. And the duet with the lead singer of Hailstorm towards the end is a beautiful song. I do like that one. It's weird I called a song by Avatar beautiful. It definitely is a really good song, but yeah, pretty good. Number 2, Shame, Food for Worms. I never really heard of Shame, so when I went into it, I enjoyed this. I went back to listen to some of the earlier stuff, but Food for Worms really stood out to me as just the best album they have to offer. They explore a pretty good direction, honestly, just trying a bunch of different ideas. I don't like the fact that some bands will just kind of stick to their guns and not change, or at least try something refreshing, and I think Shame's one of those bands that will absolutely not do that. I think Shame have got a pretty bright future, and third album, it's fantastic and the strongest album they have to offer. Really good. And my number 1 might be a little bit controversial, but I quite like In Flames Foregone. I think this album is really good. Lyrically, it's kind of weak, but I think everything else pretty much makes up for it. I like the mixing, I like the full direction they have. I definitely know Joe Rickard, it was one of the temporary drummers in the band, who was around the weak era of like Siren Charms and I The Mask. I definitely know he helped mix this, and I know that he's a great mixer. He's mixed some of my favourite albums from bands, and it's nice to see that he's still getting on with In Flames. But yeah, this is a really, really good month, I think. There's a lot of good albums. I know a lot of it has been like 3 out of 5s, like Distant, You Me at 6, Graphic Nature, Gorillaz, and INSOMNIUM. But I just thought, well, these are good albums, but they didn't really bring that much, it wasn't really that much for me to get out of it. I enjoyed them, but I wouldn't say they're crazy good either. But they're still pretty good albums. That's why I at least have a few that are just better. I definitely thought the top 3 is pretty much the best stuff here. And I'm rambling a little bit, so I should probably wrap the video here. But there you go. That is my February albums of the month reviewed. I know my mic doesn't sound great. I've been trying to sort out some ideas for it, so I've been editing so I can put the audio a bit better, so I'm not speaking directly into the mic, because sometimes I will sit right in front of the mic, head straight to it, and speak, and if I raise the volume, you'll just hear a lot of put, or a little puts or tuts, and it'll just be really annoying. So I know I'm trying to get a new mic, but I haven't got the money yet to get it. So yeah, that is my review on the February albums, and I'll be looking forward to editing this, and I'll be looking forward to writing the March, followed by, well, we're soon getting to April, so we have April to look forward to, and then hopefully after that I can actually write some separate reviews on albums that came out this year. So there you go. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed, and yeah, see you guys in the next video.